In the shadowy world of wartime espionage, Japan's intelligence agencies weren't just failing. They were actively working against each other. Behind every major conflict lies a hidden battle of information. You cannot defeat an enemy you do not understand, and victory is impossible without crucial insights. While Japan faced immense challenges in World War II regardless, the profound dysfunction within its spy services sealed a fate that was already grim. But the roots of this collapse were deeper and more complex than simple incompetence, and they grew over decades. The story of Japanese military intelligence starts in the 19th century. The Army and Navy built their spy networks independently, and these were far from sophisticated organizations initially. Gathering secrets often meant writing to Japanese expatriates and asking for any useful news. In the 1890s, an officer named Seirai created the Institute for Sino-Japanese Trade, a pioneering group with intelligence as its core mission. This was in preparation for the coming war with China, though China's military was vastly larger. Japan's gathered knowledge revealed critical weaknesses, allowing for a swift and decisive victory. Soon, Japan's gaze turned toward Russia. The Imperial Japanese Navy had by now consolidated its spy efforts into a unit called the Third Department. The army, however, clung to its old informal methods as it approached a new war. Despite their different approaches, both branches reached a similar conclusion about Russia. A long war was unwinnable, but lightning-fast attacks could shatter Russian logistics and force a surrender. This strategy proved stunningly effective, handing Japan a victory from which Imperial Russia never recovered. Japanese military thinkers were disciples of the Prussian model, which prized rapid tactical victories. They largely ignored the emerging concept of total war, a philosophical error with devastating future consequences. After the Russo-Japanese conflict, the army finally began building a proper intelligence service. Notably, the Second Department under the Army General Staff, which focused on cryptography. These early technical efforts were, contrary to common belief, highly advanced. By the 1920s, they had completely broken the diplomatic codes and partially cracked the military ciphers of the United States, Britain, and China. They even managed to read Soviet diplomatic messages by sending captured documents to Poland for analysis. The Soviet Union remained the Army's primary intelligence target, a focus that would persist straight into the next World War. The 1930s saw Soviet security and code-making improve dramatically. New cryptographic systems appeared constantly. While many could eventually be broken, it now took far longer, and the intelligence was often outdated or unreliable by the time it was deciphered. Japan even entered an intelligence pact with Germany, trading decrypted British and American messages for decoded Soviet ones. These mounting issues contributed directly to Japan's defeat in a border war with the Soviets. At the Battle of Khalkhin Gol, the Japanese army cracked Soviet Air Force codes, but failed to break the Red Army's, completely missing a force 4 times larger than estimated. They had focused on locating key positions, believing this would enable a quick win, and were blindsided by overwhelming force. After this, the Soviets adopted a new, far more secure system that Japan couldn't reliably break for years. Japanese struggles with Soviet codes extended into the war in China. They easily broke the ciphers of the nationalist government, but found those used by communist guerrillas, aided by Soviet experts, and frequently changed, far more difficult. They largely cracked this system by 1941, but reading the communications remained inconsistent. While the army grappled with the Soviets, the Navy saw significant success against its main targets, America and Britain. The Navy's codebreakers were skilled, defeating many early American ciphers, though the U.S. had not yet prioritized strong codes. The State Department's Gray Code and Brown Code were both broken soon after their introduction. These simple systems were eventually replaced with complex strip ciphers. After a massive effort, Japanese cryptanalysts cracked them, a feat that eluded both British and German codebreakers. This gave Japan a window into American diplomatic and military traffic. They capitalized quickly, positioning a converted oiler near Hawaii to intercept U.S. Navy radio signals. They went further, around 1938, establishing a listening post in Mexico that could pick up signals from Washington, D.C. and New York, monitoring both the Atlantic and Pacific fleets. Cracking British ciphers, however, was a much harder fight. British diplomatic codes were exceptionally tough, taking Japanese codebreakers years of dedicated effort. A major breakthrough came in 1934, when a Japanese typist at the British consulate in Sapporo literally tossed a codebook out a window. But British officials changed their entire encryption system in 1935, rendering the stolen book useless. Japan persisted, and by around 1940, they could reliably read British diplomatic cables. This allowed planners to discover in early 1941 that defenses in Malaya and Singapore were critically weak. Virtually all of Japan's code efforts were offensive, focused on cracking enemy systems, while their own ciphers were dangerously underdeveloped. The Navy used only two primary ciphers throughout the war. Both could be read, at least partially, by American and British intelligence, though the Navy was careful to make minor updates before major operations. This is why attacks like Pearl Harbor remained complete surprises. The Navy was complacent, convinced its codes were unbreakable. The updated system post-Pearl Harbor was harder to crack, but this overconfidence meant codebooks were rarely changed, and often misused, allowing American cryptographers to break it just before the pivotal Battle of Midway. Midway was a legendary American intelligence victory. They had deduced the time and place of Japan's planned ambush. The battle was a devastating loss for Japan, rooted in a catastrophic operational security failure. The Navy's official log admitted, "The enemy had grasped our intentions beforehand," while the Admiralty tried to hide the scale of the defeat. They blamed everything but their compromised codes and failed to make meaningful changes. The Army knew about the vulnerabilities in the Navy's codes, but the bitter inter-service rivalry prevented this critical information from being shared until 1943. The two branches never created a system for sharing intelligence. In fact, generals and admirals often sabotaged attempts to build one. This led to wasted effort, with both branches spending resources to achieve identical intelligence goals. The Foreign Ministry, which gathered its own intelligence, also rarely shared anything with the military. A core reason for this dysfunction was how the military viewed intelligence work. Spy services were considered a lesser assignment. Those who worked in them were often seen as mere message runners. Intelligence was viewed as a temporary post, or even a punishment detail. As a result, these departments were either understaffed or staffed with the unqualified. Military leaders frequently ignored provided intelligence or cherry-picked reports to fit their own preconceived plans and objectives. It was exceedingly rare for the military to consider intelligence analysis for anything beyond an immediate, tactical need, with only a few exceptions. In 1940, Japan could read the diplomatic communications of France, Britain, the US, and China. After Paris fell, Japan looked hungrily at French Indochina, a key route for Allied aid to China. Through decoded cables, Japan learned that no country was willing or able to defend Indochina. So, before local French authorities or Chinese forces could organize, Japan simply moved in. The operation was a massive success, meeting little resistance. Ironically, France had signed an agreement allowing Japan to take over military infrastructure just a day before the invasion. But the army was not told, leading to unnecessary fighting. The army's intelligence priority remained the Soviet Union, and it took the disaster at Guadalcanal in 1943 to change that. From the start, Japanese intelligence was wildly wrong, estimating only 1,000 American troops on the island when there were actually 20,000. Part of the problem was the Army's reluctance to send field reports back to intelligence staff, creating a vicious cycle where both spies and commanders operated on bad information. Finally, the Army shifted its focus, bringing in specialists on American and British intelligence. The Navy's specialists, meanwhile, were working with German intelligence to achieve a major breakthrough, cracking BAMs, the broadcast to Allied merchant shipping. The German raider Atlantis had captured a BAM's codebook and shared it with Japan, who used it to read the radio transmissions, since merchant traffic would surge in a region about a month before an Allied operation. The Navy could often predict general enemy movements. This success was utterly negated by a stunning failure. The Navy's own internal messages were being read by American intelligence, who intercepted one detailing the exact travel itinerary of Admiral Yamamoto, the Navy's top commander. Using this information, American fighters ambushed and shot down his plane, killing him. Yamamoto's death was a massive blow to morale and the war effort, a direct result of an intelligence failure. The Navy investigated, but concluded it was just bad luck. It was only after his death that the Army and Navy began holding regular meetings to share information. In 1943, the military, with the Foreign Ministry, also created the Cipher Security Committee to improve communications security. This cooperation lasted barely a year. By October 1944, at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, war's largest naval battle, the two branches adopted a policy of non-exchange. They abruptly stopped sharing information. leaving both with a distorted picture of the battlefield. The trouble started a week before Leyte Guelph, with a major air battle near Taiwan. American carriers launched massive strikes against Japanese bases on the island. The operation was a success for the U.S., destroying most Japanese planes and airfields. A few American cruisers were damaged, but no ships were sunk. Imperial headquarters, however, issued a false report claiming 19 American carriers and 4 battleships had been sunk, a report the Navy received. The Navy's own intelligence doubted this, and intercepted American communications reported no losses. But the Admiralty, desperate for a decisive victory, chose to believe the false report. This alternative report was not shared with the Army, which was preparing to defend the Philippines. So, the Army changed its strategy from a deep defense on Luzon to a concentrated defense on the beaches at Leyte. They believed the Navy had already won, and any American landing would be weak and easily thrown back. By the time the Army realized the true scale of the American attack, it was too late. Reinforcements were destroyed by American air power the Army thought didn't exist. Unsurprisingly, the two branches blamed each other for the defeat. The Army did have one significant intelligence development, a system for tracking American B-29 bombers. Using IBM computers taken from Japanese insurance companies, math students from Tokyo Imperial University, and a complex punch card system, they could predict B-29 locations about 80% of the time. The exact impact on American losses is unclear, but many shootdowns were credited to it. The system even tracked the Enola Gay and Boxcar, the planes that dropped atomic bombs, though the word nuclear wasn't deciphered until after the attacks. Their greatest enemy was often the rival service next door. Beyond signals intelligence lies the world of human spies, or HUMANT. This involved classic espionage, psychological operations, and surveillance. HUMANT was viewed more favorably by the military, though it was still seen as a secondary career. Most activities were run by the special departments or by separate special duty agencies. As with signals, efforts were split. The Army focused on the Soviet Union, running spy missions across Siberia. The Trans-Siberian Railway was a key target. Agents would ride civilian trains, photographing and logging Soviet military logistics. The Army also gathered information from Soviet defectors crossing into Manchukuo, though their insights were often poor. The USSR's powerful counterintelligence machine was a wall Japan never scaled. They rarely attempted deep infiltrations, as their spies often returned as double agents. Army officers developed an informal rule: distrust anyone who claimed to be an expert on the Soviets. The Navy, meanwhile, targeted America and Britain. In the UK, they intriguingly prioritized recruiting celebrities, like Frederick Rutland, a famous WWII pilot, who helped design Japan's carriers. He was sent to California in the 1930s to gather data on the U.S. Pacific Fleet and aircraft production. He may have contacted Takeo Yoshikawa, another agent in Hawaii. Yoshikawa arrived under a fake identity as a diplomat. Starting in January 1941, he joined civilian tours on Oahu, meticulously recording U.S. Navy movements at Pearl Harbor. His photos and data were vital in planning the attack. His reports were often sent via diplomatic channels, but he was also aided by Bernard Kuhn, a German spy. Kuhn used light signals from his house to relay U.S. fleet movements to Japanese submarines. Kuhn was later arrested based on captured documents. Japanese conspirators were even bolder in Hong Kong. December 7, 1941, involved coordinated strikes across the Pacific, not just Pearl Harbor. The COA-KICON, or Asia Development Agency, was set up in Hong Kong and Guangzhou in early 1941 to monitor Allied naval traffic and support the Japanese Army's advance. Japanese officers worked with local triads to build bombs and sabotage British installations. They even dug a tunnel across the border. Their most crucial act was seizing Hong Kong's main water reservoirs during the battle, a major factor in the British surrender. After Hong Kong fell, this group moved to Chongqing, printing propaganda and counterfeit currency to destabilize the Chinese government. Their post-war fate is murky, with allegations of smuggling during the U.S. occupation. Another key target was the Dutch East Indies, rich in resources and strategic location. Japan had little spy network there until 1940. A key objective was seizing the oil refinery at Palembang, achieved by a risky airborne assault that required precise intelligence. From April 1941, Japanese agents gathered data on production and, crucially, stole aerial photographs from private oil companies. This greatly aided the operation's success. Propagandists embedded with Indonesian nationalist groups convinced many to support the Japanese landings and sabotage Dutch defenses. This worked partly because Dutch authorities distrusted their British and American allies, leaving their few local agents unable to stop Japanese infiltrators. Japan had an even more audacious goal across the Pacific. They sent agents to the Panama Canal zone to monitor ship traffic and study its defenses. This data was for a planned submarine attack to bomb the canal's locks and shut it down. This would have been carried out by I-400 class submarines, the largest in the world for 2 decades. Planners devised this around 1942-43 after learning from Poe's that American security at the canal was lax. Navy tests showed it was feasible. However, the I-400 submarines entered service only in 1945, and the war ended before the mission could launch. Poe's were another intelligence source. While Japan was infamous for torture, this was an ineffective method. More nuanced approaches worked better. A skilled interrogator at the Ofuna POW camp, for instance, built an accurate map of American submarine patrols simply by having casual conversations during meals. They mastered stealing secrets, but failed to protect their own. Like so much of Japanese intelligence, POW interrogations were fragmented and only sporadically useful. While intelligence sometimes delivered tactical wins, the broader strategic picture was always missed. There were impressive technical feats, but spy work was ultimately treated as secondary. Systemic flaws, internal rivalries, and military disregard created a broken system. The war's outcome was likely inevitable. But Japan's intelligence apparatus ensured its path to defeat was swifter and more certain. If you found this deep dive into the secret war fascinating, please support the channel by hitting the like button, and make sure to subscribe to Winds of Thought for more untold stories from history.